The old house stood at the edge of town, its weathered facade looming like a forgotten relic. John, Maria, and their two children, Lucas, 12, and Anna, 8, arrived in a battered moving van, their faces heavy with the weight of a tragedy they rarely spoke of, a car accident that had claimed Maria's sister a year ago. The house, with its sagging porch and ivy-choked walls, was meant to be a fresh start, a place to heal. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and earth, and the late afternoon sun cast long, jagged shadows across the cracked driveway. As they unloaded boxes, Lucas wandered upstairs to claim his room. The floorboards creaked under his sneakers, and the air felt oddly heavy, like a held breath. In his new bedroom, he noticed something peculiar. A faint carving on the wall near the window, a spiral with jagged, uneven lines radiating outward like veins pulsing under skin. It was small, no bigger than his hand, but it seemed to shimmer faintly when he tilted his head. He traced it with his finger, then shrugged it off as some old graffiti and continued unpacking. Downstairs, Maria unpacked dishes in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though the house was silent, except for the occasional thump of boxes. She glanced at the living room, where John was hanging a family portrait. As he adjusted the frame, he froze. Behind it, partially hidden by peeling wallpaper, was another symbol, a complex lattice of curves and angles that seemed to twist inward, defying perspective. "Maria, come look at this," he called, his voice tight. She joined him, frowning at the strange mark. "Probably just some old decoration," she said, but her words lacked conviction. That night, Anna woke up screaming. Maria rushed to her room, finding her daughter curled under the blankets, her eyes wide with terror. "It was watching me," Anna whimpered, pointing to the corner of the room. "It had eyes, so many eyes." Maria held her, whispering reassurances, but her gaze lingered on the dark corner, where the shadows seemed to ripple for a moment before settling. She chalked it up to Anna's imagination, stirred by the move, but sleep eluded her afterward. The next morning, John found himself drawn back to the symbol in the living room. He took a photo and searched online, but nothing matched its bizarre geometry. Curiosity gnawed at him, and he ventured into the basement to check for more clues. The air down there was damp and oppressive, the single bulb casting a weak glow. Among the cobwebs and mildew, he found an old leather-bound diary wedged between two crates. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but he could make out fragments of text, warnings about the signs and the one who watches from within. The final entry was scrawled in a frantic hand. "The walls are alive, it hungers." John's stomach twisted, but he tucked the diary under his arm, deciding not to tell Maria yet. By the third day, the family began noticing oddities. Lucas swore the symbol in his room had shifted slightly, its lines now curling in a different direction. He tried to show Anna, but she refused to enter his room, clinging to her stuffed rabbit. Maria heard faint whispers at night, like a distant conversation, in a language she couldn't grasp, emanating from the walls. She checked every room, but found nothing. John, meanwhile, caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the living room wall, a formless shape that vanished when he turned on the light. He told himself it was a trick of his tired eyes, but the diary's words echoed in his mind. The family gathered for dinner, trying to maintain normalcy. They laughed nervously about the house's creaks and quirks, blaming their unease on the stress of moving. But as they ate, Anna pointed to the wall behind John. "It's moving," she whispered. They turned, and for a fleeting moment, the symbol behind the portrait seemed to writhe, its lines pulsing like a heartbeat. Maria blinked, and it was still again. "Just shadows," John said, his voice hollow. No one believed him, not even himself. As the chapter closes, the family lies awake in their beds, the house silent, but heavy with an unspoken dread. The symbols, unnoticed at first, now seemed to watch them, their presence growing stronger with each passing hour. The house no longer felt like a home. A week had passed since the family's discovery of the strange symbols, and an oppressive weight settled over them, as if the air itself had thickened with malice. John, once pragmatic, now spent hours hunched over the old diary, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The cryptic warnings, the signs called to it. It feeds on the broken, gnawed at him, and he began sketching the symbols obsessively, filling a notebook with their twisting forms. He scoured the internet, stumbling across obscure forums mentioning forbidden geometries and ancient languages tied to entities beyond human comprehension. One post from a deleted user described a house that eats minds. John closed his laptop, his hands trembling, but the symbols seemed to burn in his vision even with his eyes shut. Maria's unease had morphed into something darker. The whispers she heard at night grew clearer, forming syllables that slithered through her, mind like worms. Jacques, Voresh, they murmured, words that carried no meaning yet filled her with dread. During the day, she caught glimpses of impossible shapes in the corners of her vision, angles that bent wrong, shadows that pulsed like living things. Once, while cleaning the kitchen, she saw the wallpaper ripple, as if something beneath it was breathing. She screamed, dropping a plate, but when John rushed in, the wall was still. "You're exhausted," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maria began avoiding mirrors, terrified of what she might see in her own reflection. Lucas and Anna were no longer the carefree children who had arrived at the house. Lucas's curiosity about the symbol in his room turned into fixation. He swore it moved, its spiral tightening like a noose overnight. One evening, he woke to find the symbol glowing faintly, and in the dark he saw a shape, a mass of writhing shadows with too many eyes, watching him from the foot of his bed. He screamed, bolting to his parents' room, but the entity vanished. When Maria flicked on the light, Lucas refused to sleep alone after that, camping out in the living room with a flashlight clutched tightly. Anna, meanwhile, stopped speaking much, her eyes hollow. She spent hours drawing in her sketchbook, producing page after page of grotesque figures, tentacled forms with endless eyes, all surrounded by the same symbols carved into the house. When Maria saw the drawings, her heart sank. They were too precise, too real. The house itself seemed to conspire against them. Doors creaked open on their own, only to slam shut when approached. Lights flickered at random, casting eerie patterns that mimicked the symbols. Objects went missing. Keys, photos, Anna's stuffed rabbit, only to reappear in impossible places like inside locked drawers. One night, John tried to erase the symbol in the living room with sandpaper, his frustration boiling over. The wall bled a thick black ichor, and the symbol reappeared by morning, larger and more intricate. He didn't tell Maria, but the diaries. Words echoed in his mind. The house is its body. Tensions frayed the family's bonds. John snapped at Maria when she questioned his late-night research, accusing her of not taking the situation seriously. Maria, overwhelmed by her visions, withdrew into silence, barely eating. Lucas and Anna bickered constantly, their fear manifesting as anger. During one argument, Lucas shouted that Anna's drawings were calling it, and she burst into tears, claiming the pictures drew themselves. That night Maria heard the whispers again, louder, more insistent, and for a moment she understood a phrase. "Give yourself to the endless." She clutched her head, trying to drown it out, but the words lingered like a stain. The chapter's climax came when Lucas, unable to sleep, crept into the basement to confront his fear. He found the diary John had hidden and read its final pages, which described a ritual to appease the Watcher. As he read, the basement walls pulsed, the symbols glowing with a sickly light. A shadow loomed behind him, its form shifting and unstable, and Lucas froze, unable to scream. The air grew heavy, and a voice, not from the house but from inside his skull, whispered, "You see me now." He stumbled upstairs, pale and shaking, and collapsed into Maria's arms, unable to speak of what he'd seen. As the chapter ends, the family huddles together in the living room, their faces drawn with fear. The house is no longer a shelter, but a predator, its symbols growing bolder, its presence undeniable. They know they should leave, but the doors feel heavier each day, and the outside world seems impossibly distant. The house was no longer a house, it was a living thing, a trap woven from the fabric of something ancient and incomprehensible. The family, John, Maria, Lucas, and Anna, hadn't slept properly in days, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with dread. The symbols on the walls now glowed faintly even in daylight, their intricate patterns shifting like liquid under the surface. John's obsession with the diary had reached a fever pitch. He'd deciphered more of its cryptic text, piecing together a horrifying truth. The symbols were a language, a summons for an entity called Jaketh, a being from a dimension where sanity was a foreign concept. The house, he realized, was its anchor, a portal that fed on the minds of those who dwelled within. Maria's visions had worsened. During a rare moment of clarity, she saw the entity in its full terror, a writhing mass of tentacles, each tipped, with unblinking eyes that pulsed with malevolent awareness. She collapsed in the kitchen, her scream echoing through the house. When John found her, she babbled about the endless eyes and a hunger that never stops. Her hands clawed at the air, as if trying to push away something only she could see. John tried to comfort her, but his own mind was fraying. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw alien landscapes, vast and desolate, where the symbols formed. Constellations in a starless sky. Lucas and Anna, desperate to escape, made a plan to flee. They crept to the front door at dawn, hearts pounding, only to find it sealed shut, the wood unnaturally warm to the touch. They tried the windows, but each one opened to a void, a black expanse that seemed to pull at their minds. Lucas hammered at a window with a chair, but the glass wouldn't break. Instead, it rippled like water, revealing glimpses of writhing shapes beyond. Anna clung to him, sobbing, as the house groaned around them, its walls pulsing like flesh. "It won't let us go," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. The house's transformations grew more overt. Walls shuddered and reshaped, forming impossible angles that hurt to look at. The staircase twisted into a spiral that seemed to descend forever. Rooms swapped places overnight, and the family found themselves lost in their own home, wandering through corridors that hadn't existed before. John, clutching the diary, attempted a desperate act. He tried to burn the symbols off the living room wall with a lighter. The flames licked the surface, but the symbols glowed brighter, and a low guttural hum filled the air, shaking the floor. John dropped the lighter, laughing hysterically, his mind teetering on the edge of collapse. Maria, regaining consciousness, found the family gathered in the living room, their eyes glassy, their movements sluggish. They moved, as if compelled, arranging furniture in a circular pattern around the largest symbol, now pulsating with a sickly green light. She tried to stop them, but her voice felt distant, drowned out by the whispers that now filled her skull. Join the endless, become one. She realized with a chill that they were performing a ritual from the diary, one meant to open the way. Lucas and Anna, drawn by an unseen force, descended to the basement. There, they found an altar carved into the floor, its surface etched with symbols that glowed like dying stars. At its center was an opening, a jagged tear in reality that led to an infinite abyss, The air thrummed with energy, and the entity's presence was palpable, its form coalescing as a mass of tentacles and eyes that seemed to stretch beyond the walls. Lucas tried to pull Anna away, but she stared into the abyss, transfixed, muttering words in the same alien tongue Maria had heard. In the final moments, John, Maria, Lucas, and Anna stood before the altar, their minds shattered by the entity's gaze. Jacketh emerged fully, its form a grotesque mockery of existence, its eyes boring into their souls. The family screamed, their voices blending into a cacophony of despair as the house consumed them. Their bodies dissolved into the walls, their essence absorbed into the entity's endless hunger. The symbols flared one last time, then faded, leaving the house silent and still. As the chapter closes, the house stands empty, its facade unassuming once more. The symbols lie dormant, waiting for the next family to claim. The air is calm, but the walls pulse faintly, a reminder that Jacketh is never truly gone.